She thought she was just serving another lonely businessman that night. Julie Collins, exhausted from double shifts and fading dreams, never imagined that a mysterious client would change everything. 3 intense nights, an unforgettable connection, and then he disappeared without a trace. 2 months later, she discovered she was carrying the child of a complete stranger. But when he finally returned, the truth he revealed would shake her world. He wasn't just any man, he was a prince. But the hardest part was yet to come. If this story has already sparked your curiosity, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? Your support is what keeps these stories alive. The clatter of dishes and murmur of conversations filled the elegant restaurant as Julie Collins wiped down table 12 for the 3rd time that night. Her feet ached in the black shoes she'd worn for yet another double shift, and her smile felt as rehearsed as the specials she'd recited countless times. At 26, she had perfected the art of being invisible, moving through the upscale Manhattan restaurant like a ghost, serving wealthy clients who rarely looked her in the eye, but tonight felt different somehow. She tucked a loose strand of reddish-brown hair behind her ear and glanced at the reservation book. One more table to seat before her shift ended. Table 7, a single guest, no name, just a request for the corner booth with a view of the city lights. When the hostess led him to his table, Julie felt something shift in the air around her. He was tall, with olive skin that caught the restaurant's warm lighting, and dark hair that seemed effortlessly styled. But it wasn't his appearance that made her stop mid-step as she carried a tray of wine glasses. It was the way he moved, with a quiet confidence that seemed to command the space around him without effort. Their eyes met across the dining room, and Julie felt her breath catch. His gaze was intense, almost searching, as if he could see something in her that she didn't even know existed. She quickly looked away, focusing on her task, but she could feel his eyes following her movements. "Table 7 is yours," Sarah, the hostess, whispered as she passed by. "He specifically asked for you." Julie's heart skipped. "He asked for me, but I've never seen him before." "Maybe he heard you're the best server we have," said Sarah with a knowing smile. "Good luck." Taking a deep breath, Julie approached his table. Up close, he was even more striking. There was something regal about the way he sat, upright but relaxed, hands folded calmly on the white tablecloth. His suit was clearly expensive, but it was how he wore it that spoke of true sophistication. "Good evening," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Welcome to Lumiere. I'm Julie, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." He looked up at her, and she was struck again by the intensity in his dark eyes. When he smiled, it was subtle but genuine, transforming his serious expression into something warmer. "Julie," he repeated, as if testing how her name sounded on his tongue. His accent was slight but noticeable, refined, with hints of something exotic she couldn't place. "Thank you. I've heard wonderful things about this place." "First time here?" she asked, pulling out her notepad, though something told her this conversation would be different from her usual client interactions. "In a way," he said mysteriously. "I'm Khalid, and you're right to assume I'm not from here." There was something about the way he introduced himself, just his first name spoken with quiet authority, that left Julie intrigued. Most of her wealthy clients either ignored her completely or made a point of showing their importance. Khalid did neither. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" she asked, trying to maintain her professional demeanor despite the unusual flutter in her stomach. "What would you recommend?" he asked, leaning back slightly. "I find that people who work in a place know its secrets better than any menu." Julie was surprised by the question. No customer had ever asked for her opinion before. "Well," she said slowly, "if you want something that matches the atmosphere, the 2018 Bordeaux is exceptional. But if you want something that actually tastes like celebration, the elderflower champagne cocktail is what I'd choose if I could afford it." Khalid's smile widened. "The champagne cocktail then, and for food, what would Julie choose?" The way he said her name made her pulse quicken. "The rosemary garlic lamb. It's not the most expensive thing on the menu, but Chef Laurent makes it like he's cooking for someone he loves." "Perfect, but I have one condition." Julie raised an eyebrow. "Oh? When your shift ends, would you join me? I think good food is better with good company, and I suspect you have stories worth hearing." The request was so unexpected that Julie nearly dropped her notepad. She glanced around the restaurant, checking if anyone was watching this unusual interaction. I don't usually, she began. I understand if you can't, Khalid said gently. I just thought, sometimes we meet people who feel familiar, even though they're complete strangers. Don't you think? Julie stared at him, her heart racing. There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, that made her feel like he truly saw her. Not just the waitress in the black uniform, but her. The woman with dreams she'd almost given up on. The person who felt lost in a city of millions. My shift ends at 11, she heard herself say. Then I'll wait, Khalid replied simply. As Julie walked away to place his order, she could feel his eyes on her again. But this time, instead of making her nervous, his attention felt like a warm embrace. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt truly alive. The rest of her shift passed in a haze of anticipation and nervous energy. She found herself repeatedly glancing toward table 7, where Khalid remained seated calmly, occasionally checking his phone, but mostly just watching the city lights through the window. When she brought his food, their fingers brushed as she set down the plate, and the brief contact sent electricity through her entire body. It's perfect, he said after his first bite, his eyes meeting hers again. Exactly as you promised. At 11:15, Julie emerged from the staff room, having changed out of her uniform into jeans and a simple sweater. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached his table, where he waited with 2 cups of coffee. I wasn't sure you'd actually stay, she admitted. I said I would, he said, standing as she approached. I always keep my promises. As they walked together into the cold New York night, Julie couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was the beginning of something that would change everything. She just didn't know how much. The next night, Julie caught herself glancing toward table 7 more times than she should have. The shift was busy, but part of her secretly hoped Khalid would show up again. When she finally saw the hostess leading him in, her heart jumped in a way she tried to disguise as she finished taking another table's order. Table 7 again, Sarah murmured as she passed by. Looks like you made quite an impression. Julie smoothed her uniform and headed toward him, trying to appear casual despite the anxiety she felt. Khalid was sitting in the same position as the night before, but this time when their eyes met, there was a warm recognition that made her feel like old friends reuniting. Good evening, Julie, he said, and she noticed how he pronounced her name with special care, as if it was something precious. Back to try something different from the menu? She asked, trying to keep her tone professional, though her smile was genuine. Actually, Khalid said, leaning slightly forward, I came back to make a proper invitation. Yesterday our conversation was cut short too soon. Julie felt heat rise up her neck. We talked for almost 2 hours. Exactly. Far too little time, he replied, with that subtle smile she was already beginning to recognize. You mentioned you'd never walk through Central Park at night. Would you like to find out what it's like? The proposal was simple, but there was something about the way he made it, without pressure, but with a sincerity that touched something deep within her, that completely disarmed her. I don't usually, she began but stopped. Why was she always saying what she didn't usually do? Yes, she said, surprising herself. I'd like that. Khalid's smile transformed into something radiant. Then, we'll do this properly. First, let me have dinner and watch you shine in this place. Then we'll show you that New York has more magic than you imagine. The next 2 hours passed like a dream. Julie served other tables, but she was constantly aware of Khalid's presence, of the way he watched her work with what seemed like genuine admiration. When they finally left together, she felt like she was floating. Central Park at night was unlike anything she had imagined. The city lights created a soft glow through the trees, and the cool air carried the scent of flowers she couldn't identify. Khalid walked beside her, not too close, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. Tell me about your dreams, he said softly, as they walked along a lit path. My dreams? Julie laughed nervously. You mean besides paying my bills on time? The dreams you have when no one's watching. The ones you keep here. He touched his chest lightly. Even when they seem impossible. Julie stopped walking. No one had ever asked her this before. I wanted to write, she said finally. Stories. Children's books, actually. I know it sounds silly. Why would it be silly to create worlds where children can dream? Khalid asked, turning to face her completely. That's one of the most important things anyone can do. The sincerity in his voice hit her like a wave. What about you? She asked. What are your impossible dreams? Khalid was quiet for a long moment, looking at the distant city lights. I dream of freedom, he said finally. Of being able to choose my own life, my own path. Of being able to love without consequences. There was something about the way he said it, an underlying sadness she couldn't fully understand, that made her want to comfort him somehow. That shouldn't be impossible, she said softly. So you'd be surprised, he replied, looking at her with an intensity that made her shiver. On the third night, when Khalid appeared again, Julie could no longer pretend he was just another customer. Something was happening between them, something that grew with each exchanged glance, each whispered conversation while she worked. Tonight is my last night in New York, he said when she approached his table, and the words hit her like a punch to the stomach. Your last night, she repeated, trying to sound casual. I have responsibilities calling me back, he said, but his eyes never left her face. Julie, I'd like to spend these last hours with you. Not here, not with you serving others, just the two of us. Julie's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. Where? I'm staying at the plaza. We have room service, an incredible view of the city, and... He paused. Privacy to talk properly. The proposal hung in the air between them. Julie knew exactly what he was suggesting, and part of her, the sensible, cautious part, screamed for her to say no. But a bigger part, the part that had awakened over the last 3 nights for the first time in years, desperately wanted to say yes. I finish in an hour, she heard herself say. I'll be waiting, Khalid replied. And this time when he smiled, there was a promise in his eyes that made her feel like she was about to cross a bridge into a completely new world. When Julie went up to his room at the plaza, her hands were trembling slightly. The room was luxurious in a way she had never experienced, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, furniture that looked like works of art, and a sense of opulence that made her feel small and insignificant. But when Khalid opened the door and looked at her, really looked at her, as if she were the most important thing in the world, all her insecurity vanished. You came, he said softly, as if he hadn't been sure she would show up. I said I would, she replied, echoing his words from the first night. He smiled with that expression she was learning to love. Do you always keep your promises? Always, she whispered. And when he moved closer, when his hands touched her face with a tenderness that made her melt, Julie knew this night would change everything forever. What happened between them was more than passion. It was connection, it was recognition. It was as if 2 lost souls had finally found their home. When they finally fell asleep intertwined, Julie felt a peace she hadn't known in years. But when she woke the next morning, the bed was empty, and Khalid had vanished as if he had never existed. 3 weeks had passed since Julie woke up alone in that luxurious plaza room. 3 weeks of trying to convince herself she could move on, that those 3 nights with Khalid had been just a beautiful dream that had come to an end. But her body seemed to have other ideas. The first wave of nausea hit her during the morning shift, right as she was serving coffee to a table of executives. The strong smell of coffee, which she'd always loved, suddenly sent her running to the bathroom, leaving a tray full of steaming cups on a nearby table. Julie, are you okay? Sarah asked, finding her leaning against the sink, trying to regain her composure. Must be something I ate, Julie mumbled, but even as she said it, a terrible suspicion began forming in her mind. Over the next few days, the nausea got worse. The smell of food that used to make her hungry now made her sick. Her breasts were tender, and she felt exhausted in a way that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. But it was when she realized her period was late, 2 weeks late, that reality hit her like a speeding train. No, 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 she whispered to the mirror in her tiny Brooklyn apartment. This can't be happening. But deep down she already knew. Her body was changing, reacting in ways she instinctively recognized. Still, she needed to be sure. The pharmacy on the corner seemed miles away as she walked on shaky legs. The pharmacist, an older man with glasses that slipped down his nose, didn't even look up when she bought 3 different pregnancy tests, as if quantity could somehow change reality. Back in her apartment, Julie stared at the boxes for almost an hour before she could work up the courage to open the first one. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the test. 3 minutes, she told herself, setting the timer on her phone. 3 minutes and I'll know for sure. They were the longest 3 minutes of her life. She paced back and forth in the small bathroom, counting the seconds, trying to prepare herself for any result. But when the alarm went off and she looked at the test, 2 clear pink lines stared back at her like a verdict. "Oh my God," she whispered, sinking heavily onto the edge of the bathtub. "I'm pregnant." She took the other 2 tests, as if they might give a different answer. All positive, all confirming what her heart already knew. She was carrying the child of a man who had vanished from her life without a trace, a man she knew only by his first name, who had shared 3 magical nights with her, and then evaporated like smoke. The tears came then, tears of fear, of confusion, of a loneliness so deep it made her double over. How had she been so naive? How had she let herself dream that a man like Khalid could actually be interested in someone like her? "What kind of idiot was I?" she sobbed to the mirror. "I don't even know his last name. I don't even know where he's from. How am I going to find him to tell him this?" The reality of the situation began to sink in slowly. She was alone, pregnant, working for tips at a job that barely paid her bills. She had no family. Her parents had died in a car accident 3 years ago, and she was an only child. She had a few friends, but no one close enough to support her through something like this. "What am I going to do?" she asked her reflection, but her reflection had no answers. In the weeks that followed, Julie tried to maintain her normal routine, but everything felt different now. Every smell made her nauseous. Every movement required extra effort. At work, she tried to hide the waves of nausea, running to the bathroom between tables when necessary. "Julie, honey, are you sure you're all right?" asked Margaret, the assistant chef, a motherly woman in her 50s who had always been kind to her. "You've been looking very pale lately." "I'm fine, Margaret, just a little tired," Julie lied, forcing a smile. But Margaret wasn't easily fooled. After their shift, she pulled Julie into a corner of the empty kitchen. "Sweetie," she said gently, "I raised 3 kids. I know the signs. You're pregnant, aren't you?" The words were like a dam bursting. Julie started crying right there, in the middle of the stainless steel kitchen, with Margaret wrapping her in a maternal hug she didn't even know she needed. "Shh, honey. It's okay," Margaret murmured. "Tell me what happened." Between sobs, Julie told her everything. About Khalid, about the 3 magical nights, about how he disappeared and how completely lost she felt. "And you have no way to contact him?" Margaret asked. Julie shook her head. "He said he was staying at the plaza, but when I called, they said they had no record of any Khalid. I don't even know his last name. It's like he never existed." Margaret held Julie's face in her hands. "Listen to me carefully, honey. You're stronger than you think. And this baby will be loved with or without the father." "But how am I going to manage?" Julie asked desperately. "I can barely support myself, let alone a child." "One step at a time," Margaret said firmly. "First, you need to see a doctor. Then we figure out the rest." That night, alone in her apartment, Julie placed her hand on her still flat stomach and tried to imagine the life growing inside her. It was terrifying and exciting at the same time. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "I don't know how we're going to do this, but I promise I'll love you. I promise I'll be the best mother I can be." It was a promise made in the darkness, to a child that was still just a possibility. But it was sincere, and for now, it had to be enough. As she got ready for bed, Julie looked out the window at the lights of Manhattan twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, Khalid was living his life, probably not even remembering her. He would never know about the baby, never know he had left a part of himself behind. "I don't know where you came from," she whispered to the night, "but this child will know where they come from. They'll know they're loved." It was all she could offer right now. But maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. 2.5 months after that terrifying morning in the bathroom, Julie had gotten used to her new reality. Her morning sickness had subsided, replaced by constant fatigue and a belly that was beginning to show a small curve. She had told the restaurant manager the truth, who promised to keep her working as long as she could, and started making plans for a future that seemed both impossible and inevitable. It was a rainy Tuesday when her life turned upside down again. Julie was wiping down tables after the lunch rush when she felt that familiar sensation, like someone was watching her. She looked up and her heart stopped. There, standing at the restaurant entrance, was Khalid. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, elegant, with that magnetic presence that made the air around him seem thicker. But there was something different in his eyes this time, a seriousness, an urgency that hadn't been there before. For a moment they just stared at each other across the dining room, the world around them disappearing. Julie felt her legs go weak, and she gripped the nearest table to keep her balance. Khalid began walking toward her, and each step seemed to echo in Julie's chest. When he stopped in front of her, he was so close she could smell the masculine cologne that had haunted her dreams for months. "Julie," he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered, rich, with that subtle accent that made her shiver. "Khalid," she managed to whisper, her voice coming out rougher than she intended. They stood there for an eternal moment, drinking in the sight of each other. Julie could see he was studying her face, noticing the small changes, the weight she had lost in the early weeks of pregnancy, the pallor that still hadn't completely disappeared. "You vanished," she said finally, and heard the pain in her own voice. "I know," he replied, and there was something that looked like remorse in his dark eyes. "And I apologize for that. There were things I needed to resolve, responsibilities I couldn't ignore." "Responsibilities," Julie repeated, and felt a spark of anger ignite in her chest. "Is that what you call it?" Khalid looked around the restaurant, noticing the other customers and staff who occasionally glanced in their direction. "Can we talk privately?" he asked. "There are things I need to explain to you. Important things." Julie hesitated. Part of her wanted to scream at him right there, in front of everyone. She wanted to ask how he dared show up after months, as if he could simply pick up where they'd left off. But the other part, the part that had missed him every single day, was desperate to hear what he had to say. "My break is in 15 minutes, she said finally. "I'll be waiting outside," Khalid replied, and left the restaurant with the same quiet elegance with which he had entered. The next 15 minutes were torture. Julie tried to focus on work, but her hands shook as she cleaned tables that were already clean and rearranged condiments that were already perfectly arranged. Her mind raced with thousands of possibilities, thousands of things she wanted to say to him. When she finally left the restaurant, Khalid was leaning against a luxurious black car she hadn't noticed before. He approached her immediately. "There's a quiet cafe 2 blocks from here," he said. "Can we talk there?" Julie nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked in silence, the light rain creating a soft mist around them. The cafe was small and cozy, with only a few occupied tables. Khalid chose a corner table, away from the other customers. "Coffee?" he asked, but Julie shook her head. Caffeine had been making her nauseous lately. "Chamomile tea," she said, and saw something pass through Khalid's eyes, an expression she couldn't decipher. When their drinks arrived, they sat in silence for a moment. Julie could feel tension radiating from him, as if he was preparing for something difficult. "Julie," he began finally, "what I'm about to tell you will change everything between us. And before I do, I need to know it. Did you miss me?" The question caught her off guard. "Did I miss you?" she repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity. "Khalid, I thought about you every day. I wondered what I had done wrong, why you had disappeared like that. So yes, I missed you, but that doesn't change the fact that you hurt me." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if her words were a physical blow. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, "but there were things about me, about my life, that I couldn't reveal at that moment." "What kind of things?" Julie asked, feeling her patience running out. Khalid took a deep breath, looking directly into her eyes. "My full name is Khalid al-Rashid. I am the Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Al-Sarim." The words seemed to echo in the air between them. Julie stared at him, waiting for him to smile, to say it was a joke. But his expression remained serious, almost solemn. "Excuse me, what?" she whispered. "I'm a sheikh, Julie, an Arab prince. Al-Sarim is a small kingdom in the Persian Gulf, rich in oil and tradition, and I am next in line to the throne." Julie felt the world spin around her. "You're kidding me." "I would never joke about something like this," Khalid said, pulling something from his jacket's inner pocket. It was a diplomatic passport and some official documents. This is why I had to leave so abruptly. My father had scheduled urgent meetings with other Arab leaders. I couldn't postpone them. Julie looked at the documents with wide eyes. The royal coat of arms, the official seals, Khalid's photo in formal attire. Everything confirmed the impossible. "A prince," she whispered. "You're actually a prince." "And that's why I came back," Khalid said, putting the documents away. "Julie, these past weeks in Al-Sarim have been torture. I couldn't stop thinking about you, about the nights we spent together. I know I don't have the right to ask, but is there a possibility we could start over?" Julie stared at him, her mind struggling to process everything. Khalid, the mysterious man who had disappeared from her life, was royalty, a prince, and he was sitting there in a small cafe in Manhattan, asking for a second chance. But there was something he needed to know, something that would change everything. "Khalid," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something you need to know too." He leaned forward, his dark eyes fixed on her face. "What is it?" Julie took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would change their lives forever. "I'm pregnant, and the baby is yours." The silence that followed Julie's revelation seemed to last an eternity. Khalid remained completely still, his dark eyes fixed on her face, processing the words he had just heard. Julie could see a series of emotions passing through his expression: shock, confusion, and then something that looked like hope mixed with terror. "Pregnant," he repeated slowly, as if testing the word on his tongue. "How far along?" "Almost 3 months," Julie replied, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly that still barely showed signs of pregnancy. Khalid ran his hand through his hair, an expression of absolute amazement taking over his face. "A baby. Our baby. If this baby is mine," he said finally, his voice carrying a solemnity Julie had never heard before, "it will be the next heir to the throne of Al-Sarim, and it will be recognized." The words hit Julie like lightning. Heir to the throne. Her child, that little life growing inside her, would be a prince or princess. "I know this is a lot to process," Khalid continued, leaning forward. "But Julie, I want you and our child to come with me to Al-Sarim. You'll have the best medical care in the world, complete security and—" "Wait," Julie interrupted, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. "You're asking me to abandon my life and move to a country I don't even know where it is." "It's not abandoning," Khalid said gently. "It's starting a new life, a life where you and our child will have everything you need." Julie looked at her hands, trying to organize her thoughts. "And if I say no?" "Then I'll respect your decision," Khalid replied without hesitation. "But please don't decide now, at least come see my world. If you don't like it, you can come back whenever you want." 2 weeks later, Julie found herself aboard a private jet, flying over the ocean toward a kingdom that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. Khalid had taken care of every detail, her passport, visas, even appropriate clothing for the desert climate. He had sat beside her throughout the flight, explaining about his country, his culture, trying to prepare her for what she would find. Al-Sarim means the safe place in Arabic, he had explained. "My great-grandfather chose that name when he founded the kingdom. He said he wanted to create a place where his people could prosper in peace." When the plane finally landed, Julie was breathless. Al-Sarim was more beautiful than any photograph could capture. The airport was a work of art in white marble and gold, with intricate columns and lush gardens that defied the surrounding desert. "Welcome to Al-Sarim," Khalid said softly as they stepped off the plane. The heat hit her immediately, dry and intense, but not uncomfortable. A delegation was waiting for them, men in traditional white attire and women in long, colorful dresses, all bowing respectfully when Khalid appeared. "Your Highness," said an older man in perfect English, "your father, His Majesty, is eager to receive you at the palace." The palace was even more impressive than the airport. Julie gazed in fascination through the car windows as they passed golden gates and gardens that looked like oases. The palace itself was a magnificent structure that blended traditional Arab architecture with modern luxury. Elegant towers, shining domes, and walls that seemed to glow in the sunlight. "It's bigger than many cities," Julie murmured, and Khalid smiled. "My family has lived here for 5 generations, he explained. Each king added his own wing. When they entered the palace, Julie felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole. Everything was grand. High ceilings decorated with gold and precious stones, marble floors that reflected light like mirrors, Persian rugs so beautiful she was afraid to step on them. Between veils and golden columns, I was just a foreigner with a secret in her womb, she thought as she followed Khalid through endless corridors. She was installed in a suite that was larger than her entire New York apartment. It had a living room, a bedroom with a bed that could accommodate 6 people, a bathroom with a marble bathtub the size of a small pool, and a private balcony overlooking perfectly manicured gardens. "Amina will take care of you," Khalid said, introducing a gentle woman in her 40s. "She speaks English fluently and knows every corner of the palace. If you need anything, she'll provide it." "Thank you," Julie said, feeling lost amid so much luxury. "Rest today," Khalid said, gently touching her arm. "Tomorrow you'll meet my father and we'll start taking proper care of you and the baby." In the first weeks, Julie felt like she was living in a dream. She had private doctors who visited her daily, chefs who prepared any food she desired, and servants who anticipated her needs before she even expressed them. Her morning sickness disappeared completely, and for the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she felt truly cared for. But as the days passed, reality began to set in. Khalid was constantly busy with royal duties, meetings with ministers, audiences with citizens, trips to other Arab countries. When he was at the palace, there were always protocols to follow, people who demanded his attention. "I'm sorry," he would say when he had to cancel the dinner they had planned. "There's a diplomatic crisis I need to resolve." Julie understood, or at least tried to understand, but understanding didn't make the loneliness less painful. She explored the palace with Amina, learning about the history and traditions, but always felt like she was observing from the outside. The court women were polite to her, but maintained a respectful distance that made her feel isolated. The men didn't even look in her direction, following rigid protocols of etiquette. "Are you happy here, madam?" Amina asked one day as they walked through the rose gardens. Julie considered the question. She was comfortable, safe, cared for, but happy. "It's very different from my previous life," she said diplomatically. "Change is difficult," Amina agreed, "but Prince Khalid loves you very much. You can see it in his eyes when he speaks of you." "He said that?" Julie asked, her heart racing. "Not with words," Amina smiled. "But some things don't need to be said to be known." That night, Julie dined alone again. Khalid had left for an emergency meeting with delegations from Kuwait. She sat on her balcony, looking at the desert stars that shone more brightly than anything she had ever seen in New York. She placed her hand on her belly, which now showed a definite curve. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Will this place be our home?" There was so much beauty around her, so much luxury and care. But there was also silence, an emotional emptiness that all the gold and marble in the world couldn't fill. She missed the simplicity of her previous life, the genuine connection she had felt with Khalid in those first 3 nights. Here, he was a prince first, and perhaps a man second. And she was still trying to figure out who she was in this golden world where she had no defined place. As the stars danced above her, Julie wondered if love would be enough to bridge the gap between their 2 very different worlds. Julie woke up at 4 in the morning with a strange, intense pain shooting through her belly. Still half asleep, she shifted position in the enormous bed, thinking it was just the baby moving more vigorously than usual. But when the pain returned 20 minutes later, stronger and longer lasting, she knew it wasn't ordinary fetal movement. "It can't be," she whispered to the darkness of her room. "There are still 2 weeks left." But her body had other plans. The 3rd contraction made her double over, gasping. With trembling hands, she reached for the phone on the nightstand and pressed the button that connected directly to Amina. "Miss Julie?" Amina's sleepy voice came through the intercom. "Is everything all right?" "Amina," Julie managed to say between heavy breaths. "I think I'm going into labor." Within minutes, her room transformed into a center of controlled activity. Amina arrived first, followed by Dr. Hassan, the royal obstetrician who had monitored her pregnancy. Nurses appeared as if they had materialized from thin air, and someone was making urgent phone calls. "Where's Khalid?" Julie asked while Dr. Hassan examined her. "His Highness is in an emergency meeting with the Saudi delegation," Amina explained, holding her hand. "They started at 2 in the morning. We've already sent an urgent message. Contractions are coming every 15 minutes, Dr. Hassan announced in English. It's real labor, but we still have time. We'll transfer her to the Palace Medical Wing." Julie had never seen the Palace Medical Wing before. It was a complete private hospital with state-of-the-art equipment that rivaled any medical center in New York. But all the advanced technology in the world couldn't fill the emptiness she felt when she looked around and didn't see Khalid. "He'll be here soon," Amina assured her, seeing the expression on Julie's face. "Diplomatic meetings sometimes can't be interrupted, but as soon as he gets the message—" "I know," Julie said, trying to sound understanding even as another contraction hit her. "He has responsibilities." The following hours dragged on in a haze of growing pain and expectation. Julie tried to focus on the breathing techniques she had learned, but her eyes kept turning to the door, hoping to see Khalid's familiar face appear. 8 centimeters, Dr. Hassan announced after another examination. "It won't be much longer now." "And Khalid?" Julie asked, her voice coming out more desperate than she intended. Amina exchanged a worried look with one of the nurses. "Still in the meeting, madam, but he's been informed about the labor's progress." Julie closed her eyes, feeling tears of frustration and pain mixing together. She had imagined this moment so many times, Khalid holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, sharing the magic of their child's birth. Instead, she was surrounded by kind strangers in a foreign country, giving birth alone. "He chose the throne," she thought bitterly, as another contraction swept over her. "I chose my child, and there wasn't room for both at that moment." "Miss Julie, you need to start pushing," Dr. Hassan said, positioning himself at the foot of the bed. "Your baby is ready to meet the world." What followed was a blur of intense pain, shouts of encouragement, and a primitive strength she didn't know she possessed. Julie clung to Amina's hand like an anchor, pushing with all the energy she had, channeling months of loneliness and frustration into each effort. "I can see the head," Dr. Hassan exclaimed. "One more push, madam." Julie gathered all the strength she had left and pushed with everything she had. Suddenly, there was a sensation of relief, followed by the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, the strong, healthy cry of a baby. "It's a boy," Dr. Hassan announced, lifting up a small, red, protesting being. "A perfect prince." When they placed the baby in her arms, Julie forgot everything else, the pain, the loneliness, even her anger at Khalid. Her son was perfect. Small but with powerful lungs that announced his arrival to the world. He had a head full of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, Julie saw they were the same dark honey tone as Khalid's. "Hi, my love," she whispered, gently touching his face. "I'm your mummy." The baby stopped crying at the sound of her voice as if he recognized her. Julie felt her heart expand in a way she didn't know was possible. "What shall we call him?" Amina asked softly. Julie looked at her son, considering. She and Khalid had never discussed names. They had always assumed they would have time for that together. "Caleb," she said finally. "Caleb Collins." "Not Al-Rashid?" Dr. Hassan asked, raising an eyebrow. Julie looked at the door once more, where Khalid still hadn't appeared. Her heart tightened, but her voice came out firm. "Collins. He'll be registered as Caleb Collins." It was a decision born from pain and disappointment, but also from a fierce maternal strength she didn't know she possessed. If Khalid couldn't be present for his son's birth, then he didn't deserve for the baby to carry his name. At least, not yet. 2 hours later, when Julie was finally settled in a recovery room with Caleb sleeping in her arms, the door opened abruptly. Khalid rushed in, still wearing the formal suit from his meetings, his hair disheveled and his eyes wild with panic. "Julie, sorry, He stopped abruptly when he saw the baby. His expression transformed from desperation to absolute amazement. "You missed it," Julie said simply, her voice calmer than she felt. Khalid approached the bed slowly, his eyes fixed on the baby. "Is he your son?" Julie confirmed. "Caleb. He was born at 11:47 in the morning." "Caleb," Khalid repeated reverently, extending a finger to gently touch the baby's little hand. When Caleb instinctively grabbed his finger, Julie saw tears form in Khalid's eyes. "Julie, I'm so sorry. The meeting was about a diplomatic crisis that could have resulted in war. I couldn't. I know, Julie interrupted him, but her voice carried a coldness that made Khalid step back. You had more important responsibilities. No, Khalid said firmly. There's nothing more important than this, than you two. Julie looked at him. This man she loved, but who had chosen duty over family at the most crucial moment. Then why weren't you here? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with all the pain and loneliness Julie had felt. Khalid had no answer that could fix what had been broken in that moment. As she held Caleb against her chest, Julie knew that something fundamental had changed between them. The love was still there, but now it came accompanied by a painful understanding about where she really fit in Khalid's life. And it wasn't in first place. In the 3 days following Caleb's birth, Julie watched Khalid try to compensate for his absence by being the most attentive father possible. He cancelled meetings to stay by her bedside, held Caleb with a tenderness that made her melt, and whispered promises that things would be different from then on. But Julie had changed. The woman who gave birth alone in a foreign country was no longer the same insecure waitress from New York. Motherhood had awakened in her a fierce strength she didn't even know she possessed, a crystal clarity about what she was willing to accept and what she wasn't. I need to talk to you, she said on the 4th morning, when Khalid appeared in her room with fresh flowers from the royal gardens. Of course, he said, sitting in the chair beside the bed where she was nursing Caleb. About what? Julie finished nursing the baby and carefully placed him in the golden crib that had been brought especially for the room. Then she turned to face Khalid directly. About our future, about whether we really have one. Khalid frowned. Of course we do. Julie, I know I made a terrible mistake not being here for the birth, but it wasn't just the birth, Julie interrupted him. Khalid, I've been living in this palace for 3 months, and for 3 months you've been treating me like a side project. Your meetings always come first. Your duties always come first. Your country always comes first. I'm the crown prince, Khalid said defensively. I have responsibilities I can't simply ignore. And I understand that, Julie replied, her voice gaining strength. But I need to know where I fit into those responsibilities. I need to know if I'm your partner or just another obligation to be managed. Khalid stood up, running his hand through his hair, a gesture Julie had learned to recognize as a sign of his frustration. You're not an obligation, he said. You're the woman I love, the mother of my son. Then prove it, Julie said simply. How? Julie took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would change everything between them, for better or worse. Marry me. The silence that followed was deafening. Khalid stared at her as if she had suggested something impossible. Julie, don't give me excuses about traditions or politics, she continued before he could speak. Don't talk to me about arranged marriages or diplomatic alliances. Tell me the truth. Do you love me enough to make me your wife, or am I here just as your convenient mistress? You know it's not like that, Khalid protested. But Julie could see the hesitation in his eyes. Do I? She asked. Because that's exactly how I feel. Hidden in this luxurious room, visited when your schedule allows, treated politely by staff, but never truly accepted. Your son doesn't even have your last name, Khalid. That can be changed, he said quickly. It can, but you chose not to change it when you had the chance, Julie replied. At the hospital, when they asked how to register Caleb, you weren't there to claim him. So I made the choice for you. Khalid sat heavily in the chair, the weight of her words clearly hitting him. What you're asking of me is complicated, he said finally. There are protocols, centuries-old traditions. You can't have me as a hidden mistress, Julie said, her voice firm and decisive. Either I'm your wife or I'm going back to New York first thing tomorrow. The words came out with more force than she had planned, but she didn't take them back. It was the truth, raw, direct, and necessary. Khalid looked at her as if she had just declared war. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, Julie replied. Khalid, I gave up everything to come here. My job, my apartment, my life. And why? Because you promised we would have a life together. But what we have isn't a life. It's a golden but empty existence. You have everything you need here, Khalid protested. I have everything except you, Julie shot back. I have a beautiful room, excellent food, fantastic medical care. But I don't have a partner. I don't have someone who chooses me above everything else when it really matters. Khalid stood up again, walking to the window overlooking the gardens. Julie could see the tension in his shoulders, the internal struggle he was having. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he said without turning around. "My father is aging. The Royal Council is questioning every decision I make. There are tensions with neighboring countries that could result in conflict. I can't just—" "Then choose," Julie said, cutting off his explanations. "Choose your crown and your responsibilities and let Caleb and me go on with our lives. Or choose us and find a way to make it work." "Is that an ultimatum?" Khalid asked, finally turning to face her. "It's clarity," Julie replied. "For the first time since I got here, I'm being completely clear about what I need." Khalid studied her for a long moment, as if he was seeing a version of her he had never encountered before. "What if I can't convince the council? What if there's resistance from the royal family?" "Then you fight," Julie said simply. "The same way you fight for diplomatic issues you consider important. The question is, are we important enough for you to fight for us?" At that moment, Caleb began to cry softly, as if sensing the tension in the room. Julie stood up to pick him up, and when she held him against her chest, she felt a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I love you, Khalid," she said, looking at him over Caleb's head. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. But I won't raise my son in an environment where he has to compete with an entire kingdom for his father's attention. Julie, I have enough money for the return tickets," she continued. "Fahmina helped me arrange everything in case I decided to leave, so the choice is yours. Give me a reason to stay, or let me leave with dignity." Khalid stood there, clearly torn between two worlds that seemed impossible to reconcile. Julie could see the love in his eyes, but she could also see the fear of disappointing his people, of failing as a leader, of challenging traditions that had existed for centuries. "How much time do I have to decide?" he asked finally. "Until tomorrow morning," Julie replied without hesitation. "Caleb and I fly to New York at noon unless you give me a reason to cancel that flight." It was the most difficult ultimatum she had ever given, but also the most necessary. As she held her son and looked at the man she loved, Julie knew she had reached the moment of truth. Now it remained to be seen whether Khalid would choose love or duty. Khalid left Julie's room in a state of emotional turmoil he hadn't experienced since adolescence. His footsteps echoed through the palace's marble corridors, but he barely noticed where he was going. His mind spun between Julie's words and the expectations he had carried on his shoulders his entire life. Without realizing it, he found himself in front of the ornate double doors of his father's office. He hesitated for a moment, then knocked with determination. "Come in," came the familiar authoritative voice of King Syed al-Rashid. Khalid pushed the doors open and found his father sitting behind the antique mahogany desk, examining state documents. At 62, the king was still an imposing figure. Perfectly groomed grey hair, upright posture that spoke of decades of leadership, and dark eyes that seemed capable of seeing right through people. "Father," Khalid said, closing the doors behind him, "I need to talk to you." The king looked up from the documents, immediately noticing the troubled expression on his son's face. "About the American and your grandson, I presume?" Khalid nodded, not surprised by his father's perception. The king always knew everything that happened in the palace. "Sit down," the king said, gesturing to the chair in front of the desk. "It looks like you have a lot on your mind." Khalid sat down, struggling to find the right words. "Father, Julie gave me an ultimatum. She wants me to marry her or she's leaving tomorrow, taking Caleb with her." The king leaned back in his chair, interlacing his fingers. "And this troubles you?" "Of course it troubles me," Khalid exploded, then composed himself. "Sorry, it's just... I love her, father. I love her in a way I didn't know was possible. But I also know my responsibilities to our people. And you believe these two things are mutually exclusive?" The question caught Khalid off guard. "Aren't they?" The king was quiet for a long moment, his eyes turning to the portrait on the wall, a painting of a beautiful woman with light brown hair and gentle blue eyes. "Do you remember your mother?" the king asked softly. "Of course. She died when I was 15. "Do you remember how she came here?" Khalid frowned. It was a story he knew, but had never thought much about. She was a French diplomat. You met during trade negotiations. True, the king nodded. But that's not the complete story. The king stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. I was engaged when I met your mother, an arranged marriage to an emir's daughter from Kuwait, a political alliance that would strengthen our regional ties. Khalid straightened in his chair. I didn't know that. Because it was a long time ago, and because some stories are too painful to tell repeatedly, the king continued. But when I saw Camille for the first time in that negotiation room, I knew my life had changed forever. What happened? What do you think happened? The king turned to face his son. I cancelled the engagement. I faced the fury of the royal council, the indignation of political allies, and questions about my ability to lead. Khalid was speechless. This version of his parents' story was completely new to him. But father, you married her. You had a full royal wedding. Yes, we did. But it wasn't easy. The king returned to his chair, his eyes distant with memories. It took 2 years to convince the council. 2 years of negotiations, compromises, and proving that my love for your mother wouldn't compromise my dedication to the kingdom. And how did you manage it? By showing that a king who governs with his heart, in addition to his mind, is stronger than one who governs only by duty. The king leaned forward. Your mother brought new perspectives to our court. She established educational programs for women, improved our relations with the West, and taught me that true strength comes from authentic vulnerability. Khalid absorbed these words, feeling as if he was seeing his father and his own situation in a completely new light. But what about traditions? What about protocols? Traditions exist to serve the people, not the other way around, the king said firmly. When a tradition prevents a leader from being his best, then that tradition needs to evolve. The king stood up again, this time walking to an antique safe in the corner of the office. He took out a velvet box and brought it to Khalid. This belonged to your mother, he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning engagement ring, a central diamond surrounded by blue sapphires set in white gold. It's beautiful, Khalid whispered. I had it made especially for her. The diamond represents the purity of our love, and the sapphires represent Al-Sarem, our homeland that she chose as her own. The king closed the box and placed it in Khalid's hands. Now it belongs to you, for when you find someone worthy of wearing it. Khalid looked at the box, then at his father. But father, Julie is American. She doesn't know our customs, our religion. Your mother didn't know them when she arrived here either, the king interrupted. But true love knows no borders, Khalid, and a woman who loves enough to give ultimatums is a woman who fights for what she believes in. That's exactly the kind of strength a future king needs by his side. What if the council opposes it? Then you convince them, the same way I convinced my advisors 30 years ago. The king placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Khalid, do you think I haven't noticed how you've changed since Julie arrived? You smile more, you're more present in meetings, you make decisions with more conviction. She's already making you a better leader. But what if I fail? What if I can't balance being a husband and father with being king? Then you learn, the way we all learn. The king smiled for the first time in the conversation. Son, leading a country is like taking care of a family. It requires love, patience, sacrifice, and the courage to make difficult decisions for the greater good. Khalid was quiet, processing everything he had heard. Finally he asked, Father, do you regret it? Choosing love over political convenience? The king looked again at the portrait of his deceased wife. Your birth was the happiest day of my life. The 22 years I had with your mother were the best of my existence. And even now, 7 years after her death, I still wake up some days expecting to see her beside me. He turned to Khalid. The world may accept it or not, but your soul will know if you chose what matters. Khalid stood up, holding the box with the ring firmly. Thank you, Father, for telling me the truth. Khalid, the king called when he headed toward the door. You have until noon tomorrow, don't you? Yes. Then I suggest you stop thinking and start acting. Great loves don't wait for perfect planning. As he left his father's office, Khalid felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since Julie had arrived in Al-Sarem, He knew exactly what he needed to do, and he didn't have a second to waste. Julie woke up the next morning with a heavy heart and a firm decision. She had spent most of the night awake, rocking Caleb and mentally organizing the few belongings she would take back to New York. Amina had discreetly packed 2 small suitcases, enough for the trip, leaving behind all the expensive dresses and jewelry that Khalid had provided. At 10 in the morning, she was dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, clothes she had brought from her previous life, and that seemed more appropriate for her return to that reality. Caleb slept peacefully in his portable baby carrier, oblivious to the drama unfolding around him. "The car will be ready in an hour," Amina said softly, avoiding looking directly at Julie. It was obvious that the older woman had grown fond of them and was suffering with their departure. "Thank you for everything, Amina," Julie said, gently touching the woman's arm. "You were more than an employee. You were a friend." Amina wiped away a tear that escaped. "Are you sure this is what you want, madam? The prince, he loves you very much." "Love isn't always enough," Julie replied, looking out the window at the gardens she had learned to admire. "Sometimes love needs to be accompanied by choices." It was 11:30 when Julie put Caleb in the stroller and headed to the main hall of the palace. Her flight left at 2 in the afternoon, and the airport was 40 minutes away. It was time to leave, but when she reached the marble hall, she found something completely unexpected. The enormous space was full of people, royal council members in their traditional robes, palace staff, even some citizens who seemed to have been specially invited. Everyone was facing a small raised platform where normally only a statue of an ancient king stood. "What's happening?" Julie asked Amina, who had stopped beside her with an expression that mixed surprise and something that looked like hope. "I don't know, madam. His Highness called an emergency assembly an hour ago." Before Julie could respond, trumpets sounded and Khalid appeared at the top of the main staircase. He was dressed in full royal attire, a white tunic embroidered with gold, a navy blue cape with the Al-Sarim coat of arms, and on his head, the crown prince's crown that Julie had only seen in portraits. His eyes met hers across the crowd, and Julie felt her heart stop. There was a determination in his gaze she had never seen before, a resolution that made her reconsider everything. Khalid descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing in the reverent silence of the hall. When he reached the platform, he turned to face the assembly. "My people," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the immense space, "today I have gathered you to witness a decision that will shape not only my future, but the future of Al-Sarim." Julie felt her legs go weak. What was he doing? For generations, our royal family has followed traditions of arranged marriages, political alliances that strengthened our kingdom. These traditions served us well, and we respect them. Khalid paused, his eyes meeting Julie's again. "But today I choose a different path." A murmur ran through the crowd. Julie could see royal council members exchanging worried looks. "There is among us a woman," Khalid continued, "who taught me that true strength doesn't come from blindly following what has always been done, but from having the courage to choose what is right. A woman who gave me the most precious gift, my son." He gestured in Julie's direction, and all heads turned to her. Julie felt heat rise up her neck, but couldn't move. "Julie Collins," Khalid said, stepping down from the platform and walking directly toward her. "You taught me that a man who governs only with his mind is incomplete, that a leader needs to have heart as much as intellect." When he reached her, Khalid knelt down. There, on the marble floor of the royal palace, in front of hundreds of people, the crown prince of Al-Sarim got down on his knees. Julie covered her mouth with her hands, tears already streaming down her face. "You gave me an ultimatum yesterday," Khalid said, his voice clear but intimate, as if they were alone. "You asked me to choose between my crown and my family, but you were wrong about one thing." He pulled the velvet box his father had given him from his pocket. "I don't need to choose one or the other. I need to find a way to honor both." He opened the box, revealing the stunning ring. This ring belonged to my mother, a woman who also came from far away to become queen of Al-Sarim. She proved that love and leadership can not only coexist, but strengthen each other. The hall was in absolute silence. Julie could hear only the beating of her own heart. "Julie Collins," Khalid said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. Will you marry me? Will you become my wife, Queen of Al-Sarim, and mother of the future heirs of this kingdom? Tears were flowing freely down Julie's face now. She looked around the hall, at all those expectant faces, at the council members who seemed between shocked and curious, at Amina who was beaming. "Khalid," she whispered, "what if they don't accept me?" "Then they'll have to learn," he replied firmly, "because I chose you to, and that choice will govern my heart and my kingdom." Julie looked down at Caleb sleeping peacefully in his stroller, oblivious to the historic moment happening around him. Then she looked back at Khalid, this man who had finally chosen to fight for their love. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, louder, "Yes, I accept." The hall erupted in applause as Khalid slipped the ring onto Julie's finger and stood up to kiss her. It was a kiss that sealed not only their commitment, but a new era for Al-Sarim. When they separated, Khalid turned to the assembly. "I present to you the future Queen of Al-Sarim," he announced, "and my son, Prince Caleb al-Rashid." Caleb's full name, finally with the royal surname, sounded like music to Julie's ears. As the crowd applauded and cheers filled the air, Julie knew she had found her place in this golden world, not as a tolerated stranger, but as a woman who had been chosen publicly, unequivocally, by a man willing to challenge traditions for love. The future would still be complicated, she knew. There would be challenges, resistance, difficult moments. But now they would face everything together, as it should have been from the beginning. 2 years had passed since that transformative day in the palace's marble hall, and Julie often found herself marveling at how her life had changed. Now, as she looked out the window of her private office, yes, she had an office where she finally wrote the children's book she had always dreamed of. She could see Caleb running through the royal gardens, chasing his little sister, Yasmin. Yasmin al-Rashid had been born exactly 1 year after the wedding, a little princess with dark hair and almond-shaped eyes, who combined her mother's determination with her father's natural charm. At 8 months, she already showed signs that she would be as stubborn as Julie and as charismatic as Khalid. "Mummy, look!" Caleb shouted from the garden, pointing to a peacock that had decided to put on its feather display right in front of the children. At 2.5 years old, he spoke both English and Arabic, a little bridge between the two worlds he now called home. Julie smiled, stepping from her office onto the balcony. Wearing flowing, elegant dresses had become natural for her, though she still preferred the afternoons when she could wear jeans and play on the floor with the children. Royal life had adapted to her, as much as she had adapted to royal life. "Your Highness," came Amina's familiar voice, who now served as supervisor of the palace's children's wing. "His Majesty is returning from the meeting with the ministers." Julie still got a little chill when they called her Your Highness, but she had learned to accept it gracefully. More importantly, she had learned to use her position for things that really mattered. "How were the children this morning?" Julie asked, though she already knew the answer from the sparkle in Amina's eyes. Prince Caleb taught 3 English words to the other children, and Princess Yasmin tried to eat sand again. Amina reported with a smile. "She definitely inherited your curiosity." The children's education program Julie had established at the palace had become one of the kingdom's most beloved projects. Children from palace staff families studied alongside Caleb, creating an environment where the future king would grow up understanding his people from an early age. The sound of familiar footsteps in the corridor made Julie's heart race, as it always did. Khalid appeared on the balcony, having changed from formal attire into casual clothes, light pants, and a linen shirt that Julie had chosen for him. "How was the meeting?" she asked as he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Productive," he murmured against her neck. "We approved the new student exchange program with American universities. Your idea of bringing more Western perspectives is bearing fruit." Julie turned in his arms. Over the past 2 years, she had become much more than a ceremonial queen. Khalid genuinely asked for her opinion on policies, especially those involving education, women's rights, and international relations. She had brought a fresh perspective that the Royal Council, initially skeptical, had learned to value. "And how are our little terrorists?" Khalid asked, looking at the garden where Caleb was now trying to teach Yasmin to walk faster. "Caleb is convinced he can train Yasmin to be his adventure partner, and Yasmin is convinced that everything in the world was made to be tasted," Julie laughed. So completely normal behavior for an Al-Rashid family, Khalid said with that smile that still made Julie's heart race. They stood there watching their children play, surrounded by the palace's luxury, but also by the simplicity of just being a family. The people of Al-Sarim had grown accustomed to seeing their royal family act more casually, more approachably. Khalid still maintained all the important traditions, but had modernized many others. "Do you remember," Julie said softly, "that night at the restaurant when you said you dreamed of freedom?" "I remember," Khalid replied, kissing the top of her head. "Did you find it?" Khalid was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I discovered something better than freedom," he said finally. "I discovered purpose. Governing this kingdom with you by my side, raising our children to be compassionate leaders, building bridges between cultures. That's not freedom, it's responsibility chosen by love." Julie turned to face him completely. "And you don't regret it? Challenging the council, marrying an American waitress, changing so many traditions." "Julie," Khalid said, taking her face in his hands, "you ask me this at least once a month for 2 years, and my answer has never changed." "What is it?" "That Caleb will one day understand that his father chose courage, the courage to love." At that moment, Caleb came running to the balcony, carrying Yasmin, or at least trying to carry her. "Daddy, Yasmin is heavy," he declared dramatically. Khalid laughed, picking up Yasmin. "She's growing, my prince. Soon she'll be running faster than you." "Never!" Caleb protested, then looked seriously at his father. "Daddy, why does Grandma in the picture have different eyes than ours?" Julie and Khalid exchanged a look. Caleb had started asking questions about the grandmother he never met, about why some people in the palace looked different from him. "Because, Caleb," Khalid said, sitting down to be at his son's eye level, "families are made of people from different places who choose to love each other. Your grandmother came from a country far from here, just like your mother." "And that's good?" Caleb asked with the seriousness typical of a 2-year-old. "It's the best," Julie said, joining the conversation. "It means you carry the best of many different worlds." Caleb seemed satisfied with this explanation and ran back to the garden, shouting something about showing the peacock how he could jump. "I think we have our work cut out for us with that one," Khalid observed, rocking Yasmin, who had started to fall asleep in his arms. "Better that way," Julie replied. "Kings who ask a lot of questions become better leaders." As the sun began to set over Al-Sarim, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that rivaled the palace decorations, Julie reflected on the journey that had brought them there. From an exhausted waitress in Manhattan to queen of an Arab kingdom, from 3 magical nights to a lifetime of love. There were difficult days, of course, moments when cultural differences created misunderstandings, occasions when royal pressure seemed overwhelming, times when she missed the simplicity of her previous life. But there was also this, quiet afternoons with family, the satisfaction of using her position to create positive change, and the love of a man who had chosen to challenge an entire kingdom for her. "What are you thinking about?" Khalid asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how it all started with you looking at me across a restaurant," Julie replied, "and how somehow we got here." "Destiny," Khalid said simply. "Or luck. Or courage," he suggested. "The courage of 2 strangers to allow themselves to dream that the impossible could be possible." In the garden, Caleb had finally managed to make the peacock fully open its tail, and his shouts of joy echoed through the ancient palace walls. It was a sound that perfectly summarized their new life. Genuine joy reverberating through centuries-old traditions, modernity and history dancing together in harmony. The palace, which had once been silent and formal, now constantly echoed with children's laughter, animated conversations, and the sounds of a family that had chosen love above all conventions. And as Julie held Khalid's hand and watched their children play under the Al-Sarim sky, she knew she had found something she had never looked for, but had always needed. A home built not by tradition or obligation, but by the daily choice of 2 hearts that refused to accept that different worlds couldn't become one. And so Julie discovered that sometimes the most beautiful endings begin with the most courageous choices. A waitress from New York became a queen, not because she accepted living in the shadows, but because she demanded to be seen. Khalid learned that governing with the heart doesn't make a king weaker. It makes him unbeatable. Together, they proved that true love knows no borders, traditions, or protocols. It simply is, transforms, and builds bridges where before there were only walls. Because maybe, in the end, we all deserve someone willing to challenge the entire world for us. And you? Have you found your courage to love without limits? If this story touched you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us, where are you listening to this message from? Your support is what allows us to keep bringing you stories like this.